so I'm just starting it right now. Yeah, the YouTube said, yeah, the translation has just started. So we have all speakers here as far as I see. So I guess it's no use to delay anymore and we can start. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. So, good day to everyone. We are situated today in different time zones, but thanks to the online framework, we can talk to our colleagues based in Japan, in Switzerland, in the Philippines, and of course in Russia. But Russia is a huge country, and we are conducting this event from combining the efforts from different time zones, from Moscow and Vladivostok, to almost extreme points of this really huge country. So I will be the moderator of the today's event. My name is Dr. Ekaterina Koldunova, and I'm a part of Moscow State University of International Relations, so the Department of Asian and African Studies and of ASEAN Center. We have quite a long history of cooperation with the UN model in the Russian Far East, and I'm very happy to see that our efforts can go into further development. So it is widely recognized that it's very significant to encourage the youth action to promote sustainable lifestyle and to be aware of the sustainable development goals and, more importantly, of their implementation in a wider context. So today we are happy to welcome a range of very high-ranked participants and speakers who can share their experience in different areas of sustainable development. And we are very much happy to see you all here, and thanks for your effort and for your time to contribute to these efforts to promote the awareness of the sustainable development. The panel discussion, Northeast Asia on the way to the Agenda 2030, aims to provide an exchange of opinions and sharing hands-on experience on SDGs promotion and attainment in the region. So the talk will be between high-level experts and young leaders, which is, I will re-emphasize, is extremely important in my personal opinion as an educator and as a practitioner. We hope that this discussion will facilitate the inclusive actions on social economic development in the Asia Pacific and in the wider, Indo-Pacific scope, and incite new youth initiatives on sustainable development in the future. So let me once again congratulate the organizers, let me thank the presenters, and let me give the word to Mr. Alexei Stenonis, the Executive Director of the Model United Nations in the Far East. Alexei, please, the floor is yours.
Dr. Koldunova, thank you very much for your kind introduction to me, and warm greetings to all the participants of this bright event, both the guests and the experts, and the participants of Immunotherapy Annual Conference 2020. The premises on this panel is conducted. So let me briefly remind the group of participants and welcome the information about our organization to the guests. So Model United Nations of the Russian Far East is a non-governmental youth-led NGO based in Russian Far East, Far Eastern district of Russian Federation, in several cities of Russian Far East with the headquarters in Vladivostok. We started our activities 20 years ago in the city of Khabarovsk, and for that time, our organization was a small debate club for the people interested in the international relations and the global agenda. But many years passed, exactly, and today we one of the youth-led organization with the most widest activities in this region. We keep our active participation in the majority of major events in the youth diplomacy and even adult diplomacy, let me name it in this way, because our organization, the co-organizer of the youth platform of Eastern Economic Forum, the International Festival of Youth and Students that held in Russia in 2017, and many other events. as well as our traditional events and two biggest conference of MUN format. So the Far Eastern Model United Nations that conducted annually in May, and annual conference that we are all pleased to take part in at the panel discussion and the part of the conference. Let me one more time express our sincere gratitude to all the speakers that are going to deliver their presentations today. The ultimate goal of the Model United Nations of the Russian Far East is to increase the awareness of Russian use about the global agenda, the inter-involvement of international use, and the contribution of youth in solving of global agenda, global issues that arise today. Just a couple of words about the topics the delegates discussing yesterday, today, and 3 days more after this panel. Definitely, it is the United Nations ESCOP discussing the development of Asia Pacific. It's United Nations Environment Assembly discussing the environmental issues rising modern years. United Nations Security Council with the open agenda item, but currently the delegate decided to cooperate on the solution of international terrorism. And definitely we one of a few number of Model United Nations organizations that simulate the work of World Bank Group, and the real World Bank is our kind friend for many years. So that was my way to tell the long story short. Thank you very much for your kind attention. I do believe that this panel is going to be definitely the first, but only the first panel in frames of our conference. And in years coming, we are going to conduct it also. So looking forward to productive discussion and our common success in sharing the tendencies, experiences, and practices with the youth generation of the Russian Far East. Because one of the main principles of MUN movement worldwide is to take the global global approaches and contribute into the local implementation. So thank you very much, and the good luck to everyone.
Thank you, Alexei. Let me now pass the floor, or the screen, as they now say, to Mr. Vladimir Pavinsky, the Public Information Officer, Deputy Director of the UN Information Center in Moscow. Mr. Pavinsky has a long experience of service in the Russian Foreign Ministry and then working for the United Nations Information Center in Moscow. And his scope of interests include communications, public information, advocacy, international affairs, and human rights. So, Mr. Pavinsky, you are welcome to share your ideas. The screen is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, dear friends, I thank Model United Nations of the Russian Far East and Far Eastern Federal University for hosting this panel discussion, and I welcome those joining online. We meet in this unusual way as we enter the last month of this most unusual year. The urgent health crisis that is COVID-19 has created a historic recession with record levels of deprivation and unemployment, creating an unprecedented human crisis that is hitting the poorest hardest, especially women and children. COVID is a pandemic touching all corners of the world, and we will need our solidarity to rise to the occasion of the global response that is needed at a magnitude that we've never seen before. Every country and community has been affected, and under the leadership of the Secretary General, our job in the United Nations is to be ready to serve and to support countries, governments, communities, businesses in fighting the pandemic, suppressing the virus, and ensuring that we support all leaders in the socio-economic recovery. The impact of COVID-19 in Asia and the Pacific is tremendous due to the concentration of economic activities, demographics, and urbanization. The COVID pandemic has already reversed some of the past achievements by expanding the scale of vulnerable population and intensifying their challenges. In contrast, air pollution and carbon emission have dropped as COVID-19 stalled economic activities across the region, reminding us of the high cost of past economic development on environment and health. Thus, there is an increasing consensus and call at regional and global fora for finding ways to build back better, to overcome the immediate crisis, to rebuild the economy, to enhance resilience to future crises, and to utilize the new investment to jointly address other challenges, particularly climate emergency. According to UN ESCAP, the policy responses should prioritize people over economic recovery, and the region has to continue to pursue the implementation of the 2030 agenda. The pandemic and climate emergency require policymakers to move away from short-termism towards long-term vision through collective policy actions led by governments and supported by businesses and people, along with enhanced global and regional cooperation. The experiences of fighting against the pandemic provide valuable insights to long-term policy framework and cooperation mechanism for accelerating SDG implementation. The SCOP member states emphasize that recovery from the COVID-19 crisis provides an opportunity to build back better and reiterate the importance of multilateralism and international cooperation. The fight against COVID-19 put extreme pressure on the country's resources, making a whole of society approach all the more relevant and necessary for achieving shared goals towards sustainable development. More specifically, the Northeast Asian subregion has made relatively good progress in achieving SDGs 1 to 9 compared with goals from 10 to 16, according to the Asia and the Pacific SDG Progress Report 2020. Northeast Asia is on track or made significant progress on no poverty, Goal 1, zero hunger, Goal 2, good health and well-being, Goal 3, and quality education, Goal 4, as well as clean water and sanitation, Goal 6, affordable and clean energy, Goal 7, decent work and economic growth, Goal 8, and industry, innovation in infrastructure, Goal 9. On the other hand, the subregion needs to further intensify progress being made in income equality, women empowerment, renewable energy, marine protected areas, forest coverage, etc. Friends, the COVID-19 pandemic is unprecedented, not only in Northeast Asia, but worldwide. It has placed the subregion at a crossroads. As the recovery gains momentum, the United Nations stands ready to work with the countries of Northeast Asia and the global community to ensure progress towards the SDGs, recovery from COVID-19, and increased resilience to future pandemics. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pavinsky, for this overview of how the Northeast Asian region is doing in terms of the Sustainable Development Goals implementation, and also for reminding us that we all are now in a bad need of reshaping our views on how the region could develop further, providing the current pandemic situation. Now let me pass the screen to Professor Sukehiro Hasegawa. And let me point out that this is a truly unique opportunity to listen to a presenter of this wide range experience in a great number of the UN related activities. And let me re-emphasize that I think that Hasegawa sensei can tell us very interesting points about how he views the SDGs implementation in view of Japan, and a couple of words about his experience and his positions. Professor Hasegawa is the president of the Global Peacebuilding Association of Japan, executive director for academic exchange of the UN Association of Japan, and he also serves as the director of the Tokyo Liaison Office of the Academic Council of the UN System, chair of Japan Commission for Global Governance, advisory body for the Parliamentary Committee of the Diet of Japan for the World Federalist Movement, the chairman of the Council of Hiroshima Peace Builders Center, member of the board of directors of Earth Charter Commission of Japan, and the president of the Association of Retired International Civil Servants of Japan. His experience with the UN includes being the special representative of the Secretary General of the UN for Timor-Leste from May 2004 to September 2006, and serving as the head of the UN mission of support in East Timor. Hasegawa sensei also worked in a variety of other positions, which include working with the organizing of general elections in Cambodia, working with the policy planning of the UN peacekeeping operation in Somalia. So that's, I would reemphasize again, a unique opportunity for our younger colleagues and listeners to talk to this kind of professional. Hasegawa sensei, thanks for joining us. Thanks for finding time to share your experience, and please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for your introduction. I'm very pleased to note that I have my colleagues, Katsuma, Gerhard Sensei, Mr. Inoue, Arbenita, Elizabeth, and others. So I feel very encouraged that they will be able to reinforce or add to what I will be presenting today. Now that you say I have just about 10 minutes, I'll go very fast. That you ask that what are the, in fact, Japan's approach to SDG implementations, and I put it as a SDG Japan's strategies, but the challenges that remains before us. I was in the UN when MDG was set up. That was meant mostly for the developing countries, but the SDG is the one for all the countries, the member states of the United Nations. And Japan is certainly has a lot to not only to contribute, but also to make our own efforts with the support of other countries to achieve sustainable development goals applicable to Japan. As you see in this screen, that government and former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has placed a lot of importance to it. He attended 2 General Assembly special sessions, and this is the one he attended last year. Next page, please. Next screen. The government is doing a lot of promotion for the SDGs. Prime Minister set up a special committee chaired by himself. Foreign ministers and others participate. Almost all the government ministers. And the next slide, please. Interesting thing is that the government, and we see it, that SDG goals can be achieved not just by government, but by cooperation or by the efforts of all the parts of the society. For that matter, we have created promotion committees, networks, consisting of NGOs, NPOs, private sectors. Keidanren is very active. Academia, we have Mr. Katsuma, Gerhard Sensei, and others from universities, think tanks, and we collaborate with the international organizations. UN offices here in Tokyo. We have more than 20 representatives of UN and international organizations. Next page, next slide, please. Japan's goals and the challenges. I think we can put it as a 5 P's, namely people-oriented one. And the challenge to Japan is a gender equality. And the second one, prosperity. That the goal 7, we have challenges to secure the energy, but as you know, a nuclear power plant has been shut down, which used to provide 30% of power supply. Now we have no oil, no natural gases, we have to import. So that's a major challenge for our prosperity. Third, along with other countries, we have to address the climate change, goal 13. And also, we have the challenge for peace or peaceful society that we have to secure. Japan is relatively, or we can say, one of the most secure society in terms of tranquility and harmony within the country. However, we have to make sure that we can maintain that goal. And finally, 5P, partnership. That is a goal 17, that we need to cooperate and extend our assistance to our friends in Asia, Africa, and other parts who may need our support as well. The government and the people are very much committed in multilateral cooperations. Next page, please. Japan's strategy for SDG implementations, in fact, we have grouped it into 3. That is number 1, to make a society 5. Number 2, that we need to revitalize our regional and the local communities out in the province, or we call it the prefectures. We have 50 of them. We try to move people out of Tokyo and Osaka metropolitan areas. Thanks to COVID-19, people start, in fact, moving out of Tokyo for the first time in history. The third strategy is women empowerment. Let me touch upon 3 of these things. Next slide, please. We envisage this society 5. As you will note, that we have traversed from the society 1, that is a hunting society. And then we move to agrarian society and on to industrial society. And we are now information society. In fact, when I was in the college, we are very much concentrated in industrial society. That's about 50 years ago. Since then, we have moved into information society that is characterized by efficiency and output optimization through information and communication technology, ICT. Here, our life was very much characterized by efficiency and efficient use of natural resources and production. We are here to maximize gross national product per capita. We are measured every year by the growth in the GDP. Yet, we have found out there are the challenges that are temporal or time-wise, spatial in terms of area. COVID-19, in fact, has provided us with a challenge, but opportunity to transform our society. And we are now trying to move into Society 5. This is interesting because it's a conception that has been proposed by Keidanren, the group of economic enterprises, Toyota, Sony, and so forth. They say that we have to now optimize our society as a whole through integration of cyberspace and the physical spaces. We are no longer should be just committed to increasing the GDP. We can work out of our home. We can be engaged in the telework. That is the outcome of new coronavirus. Here in this society, we aim at human development rather than physical development. And we aim at social harmony. Next page, please. Promotion of Society 5, as you see it, therefore, is very much engaged in optimizing the society. And I think maybe Japan can make a good effort in this. Our shrinking population and the lack of natural resources hinders us from ever increasing material production. But yet, in fact, people are no longer interested in that. We have enough to eat. We have shelter to live more or less comfortably. Now we have to find a way to live with nature. Yet the nature is very, very harsh in Japan. We have typhoons, we have earthquakes, and we have an explosion of nuclear plants. So we have to now aim at the new society. And next page, please. Government is very much now pushing in this new era to revitalize the local community. We call it the Chiho Sosei. We would like to move out of Tokyo and Osaka, and we should revitalize the villages and the cities. And that here, we should give power to local people and local governments in deciding what and how to develop their own countries. Some cities are already designated, Shizuoka and other places. Local governors are elected directly by the residents and use tax revenues and income by themselves. People are encouraged to move, as I mentioned already, from the Tokyo and Osaka metropolitan areas. So, is this in fact possible that we can make a people and environment-centered society? It's a challenge that Japan is facing. Next page, please. As you will see, that the government of new government of Suga-san, he just announced on internet or on this online conference that we are going to achieve the zero emission by 2050. It's a long and winding road. How can we do it if we can't rely on a nuclear power plant? We have no oil, we have no natural gas. Is it enough to have a hydro power plant, or we have to go to other natural renewable resources? Yet, as you see from this line, in 2013, we had a very high level of green gas emission because of the Fukushima nuclear power plant led to the shutdown of all the nuclear powers. We have made efforts, and now we are coming down to 90% along with the United States. But how can we, in fact, achieve zero power emission? Next page, please. So the third challenge is women empowerment. And this is the one that we find it most challenging, exciting, but most frustrating. Japan's women empowerment has been slow. In fact, according to World Economic Forum, Global Gender Gap Index, Japan has been going down and down in terms of its ranking in the global standard. We are now 121st in women empowerment. Economic participation and opportunity is 115th. Educational attainment is good, and health and survival is better at 40. But political empowerment is the lowest at 144 for the women. How can we, in fact, reverse it? Prime Minister Abe started, wow, World Women's Opportunity. Yet many people say it was only the slogan that he had. So we need to change. Next one. To achieve the women empowerment, we have to change in our working structure, our habit, and our way of life. We need more trained women in the government and business leadership. But how can we do so? So these are the challenges that we find. And in the final slides, please. SDG number 17 is a partnership. We believe in a multilateral cooperation. That is cooperation through United Nations and other forms of cooperation through international organizations and the network. We are interested in providing more support for developing countries in the area of health, education. Professor Katsuma and our colleagues, I'm sure, will explain more in detail. And we are ready to collaborate more with the neighboring countries of China, South Korea, Mongolia, Russia. I have been personally organizing Model United Nations meetings every year among students of China, South Korea, and Japan. I hope that we can also do so with Russia. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hasegawa-sensei, for reminding us that even providing the limited opportunities, there are still possibility to make great achievements. And Japan is, of course, the case here. But also in this way, new challenges are emerging. And Japan is also showing us the way in that respect, for us to better understand what kind of challenges might emerge for an already industrialized society, for an already information-based society, and what kind of prospects we need to keep in mind, what kind of reshaping is needed for the seemingly already developed societies. So I think that the presentation was very insightful, and it gives us many well, quite a lot of food for thought how to deal with these challenges in the future. Let me now pass the screen to our next esteemed speaker, Professor Yasushi Katsuma, Professor of International Studies at the Graduate School of Asia-Pacific Studies, Waseda University, and also the Director of Global Health Affairs and Governance at the Institute for Global Health Policy Research in the National Center for Global Health and Medicine of Japan. Dr. Katsuma performs multiple duties. Let me not please enumerate them all, because the variety is really wide, but it also a sign that Professor Katsuma can expand our understanding and knowledge of the problems in question. The topic Professor Katsuma is going to address is on this slide, and it indeed refers to the point with which Hasegawa-sensei just finished his speech: multilateral cooperation, what can be done, and a particular in application to the health issues and SDG 3, which relates to the health problems. Professor Katsumata, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction. As I only have 10 minutes, I'll go quickly with my slides. And the title of my presentation is Multilateral Cooperation for Multi-Stakeholder Partnerships in Achieving SDGs 3, Good Health and Well-being for All in a World Affected by COVID-19. Let me see how it works. Okay, good. Okay, so this is just a reminder of the SDG number 3, ensure healthy lives and promote well-being for all at all ages. But of course, as we are all affected by COVID-19, I think our ways to prioritize our efforts will be quite different from the last year. And I think we probably have more emphasis on a number of accelerator themes. Actually, there are 7 accelerator themes in the Global Action Plan, but the number 5, like innovative programming for disease outbreak responses, number 6, research and development, innovation and access. These are becoming more important in our combat against COVID-19. Within the SDG 3, there are a number of targets. Actually, there are 13 targets, but I'm not going through all the targets. Just to look at target 3.3, with the emphasis on communicable diseases. Target 3.8, affordable, safe, effective, quality, and affordable essential medicines and vaccines for all, leaving no one behind. And target 3.B, research and development of vaccines and medicines, access to affordable essential medicines and vaccines. And of course, it has some mention of Doha Declaration on the TRIPS Agreement and public health, which I'm going to explain a bit more later, and also the issues of intellectual property rights. 3.D, strengthen the capacities for national and global health risk response. So these are the kind of review of the SDG number 3. And here I have a few slides about the COVID-19, but I think all the participants are well aware of it, of the current situation. So I'm going to skip a few slides, but just to remind you that the virus name is SARS-CoV-2, while the infection by this virus is called COVID-19. And this is really confusing for all of us, but just to make sure that we have the correct terms. And the importance of multilateral and multi-stakeholder approaches to the current global pandemic has been reminded a number of times as we have gone through a number of public health emergency of international concern a number of times. And actually, this is the sixth public health emergency of international concern after the H1N1 flu, wild poliovirus, Ebola virus, Zika, and again, Ebola virus. So this is the sixth public health emergency of international concern declaration based on the international health regulations that all the WHO member states are bound by this rule. However, the international cooperation has not been so successful, and as I don't see any participant from the United States of America, so it's not very fair to talk a bit about the United States. But I think the actions taken by the United States of America in the last 1 year has been quite damaging to our healthy global health cooperation. Because US stopped funding the WHO and decided to withdraw from the WHO membership. So it has been a challenge for all of us. Yes, we understand that WHO needs to go through a series of reform, and there has been some recommendation. And more recently, France and Germany started to lead another round of discussion on WHO reform, try to give more legal power and financial resources to the WHO. So it is crucial that WHO becomes more effective in harmonizing and coordinating multiple initiatives taken by its member states, as well as non-state actors to combat COVID-19. And we in the East Asia can strengthen multilateralism in the fight against COVID-19 by supporting the WHO and its regional offices, both politically and financially. So this is my first point. The second point is about the access to COVID-19 tools, ACT Accelerator. It's a multi-stakeholder platform to accelerate development, production, and equitable access to diagnostics, treatments, vaccines, while strengthening health systems. It was launched in April. East Asian countries can support the ACT Accelerator so that we can have public-private partnerships which will facilitate our research and development of the COVID-19 tools. And I'm going to focus on vaccines. Wealthy countries are busy negotiating bilaterally with pharmaceutical companies to secure sufficient vaccines for their nationals. So this is called vaccine nationalism and tend to exclude low-income countries as well as less populated countries. And wealthy countries representing just 13% of the world's population already cornered more than half of the promised doses of leading COVID-19 vaccine candidates, which is it's a kind of an issue of justice and fairness, because it's more important that all the essential workers, including health workers, in all countries will be vaccinated rather than everybody in one country will be vaccinated. The COVAX facility is the name, and it makes investment across a broad portfolio of promising vaccine candidates in order to make sure at-risk investment in manufacturing starts now by pooling purchasing power from all countries. And the COVAX facility will have rapid access to doses of safe and effective vaccines and receive regulatory approval. And among East Asian countries, Brunei, China, Japan, Singapore, and the Republic of Korea have signed commitment agreements to the COVAX facility as self-financing participants. These countries can purchase up to 20% of the population's vaccines. Although some of these countries may already have negotiated bilateral purchase agreements with the pharmaceuticals, it can risk hedge, because we never know whether we are going to have safe and effective vaccines. Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, Myanmar, Philippines, Timor-Leste, and Vietnam are eligible to participate in the COVAX facility through the advanced market commitment to be financed by ODA of wealthy countries and donations from philanthropic foundation, including the Gates Foundation, etc. In October, I'm turning into the issue of intellectual property. And in October, India, South Africa put forward a request to waive certain intellectual property during the COVID-19 pandemic. But unfortunately, it is not well supported by a few industrialized countries, including Japan. Now we have quite a number of countries supporting this proposal. But however, as I said, including Japan, a number of countries are not supporting this proposal. So it kind of reminds us of the situation when we are hit by HIV/AIDS, and we introduced waiver of intellectual property for antiretroviral drugs, and I think the proposal is to do something similar in this occasion. Okay, now let me try to finish my presentation with the possibilities of regional cooperation in East Asia. For enhancing regional cooperation, ASEAN Health Ministers Meeting, as well as ASEAN +3 Health Ministers Meeting, have been quite useful for ASEAN +3 countries. And also the tripartite health ministers meeting between China, Japan, Korea have been talking about the joint response to the COVID-19. And the group of 20 in Saudi Arabia just finished adopting a leaders' declaration at the G20 Riyadh summit last weekend. In the paragraph 3, it states, we fully support all collaborative efforts, especially the ACT Accelerator Initiative and the COVAX facility and the voluntary licensing of intellectual property. So I think the G20 countries are pretty much in line with the proposal discussed at the WHO and other locations. It is important to follow up on the joint statement so that agreements reached among those countries can be translated into joint action. And it is necessary to strengthen multilateral mechanism in East Asia. So I would include ASEAN Secretariat, Trilateral Cooperation Secretariat, UNSCAP East Northeast Asia Office. And I understand that Nobuko-san is representing UNSCAP here. East Asian Summit, ASEAN +8. So I think these are the possible platforms where we can have global health diplomacy so that we can have a joint action together. Spasiba. Thank you very much for your attention.
So thank you very much, Professor Katsuma. And I think that your presentation highlighted more important points which add to our general picture of sustainable development, not only in the region, but also in the wider context. I think that several important takeaways follow from your presentation. Number one is about the discrepancy between the global scope of the current pandemic and the limited scope of international efforts to address it collectively. Then the vaccine nationalism was mentioned, and I think that unfortunately, we will see more cleavages between low-income economies and high-income economies, and many more nuances you just pointed out to the intellectual property issue, to the multiple organizational issues, but we will see more nuances, I'm afraid. And the availability of multilateral frameworks is important because that's the way ahead, the only way ahead, I believe, to provide the vaccine for all countries in need, because only combining the efforts, I think my colleagues from Russia will mention it, but even Russia cannot, even countries like Russia or United States cannot provide the necessary amount of doses of vaccine to enable all the countries to have the enough number of vaccinated people. And without that, there is no way ahead for our well-being, our development, etc. At this point, let me pass the floor to Mr. Anton Svetov, Deputy Director of Department of Multilateral Economic Cooperation and Special Projects under the Ministry of Economic Development of the Russian Federation. And I'm aware that Mr. Svetov is directly involved in the SDG promotion and development in Russia. And he's currently in charge of Russia's interaction with the UN system, institutions, and organizations focusing on economic, trade, investment, and development cooperation. Anton has a wide research experience, and I'm happy to tell you that he is a graduate of our alma mater, Gimor University. So, Anton, please, the screen is yours, and I'm happy to see you virtually.
Thank you so much, Ekaterina. It's a pleasure to see you too, and it's a pleasure to participate in this event. It's a shame that this pandemic has barred us from traveling to the amazing Russian Far East, which is always a good thing to do at least once a year from Moscow. But I mean, I will pretend that I'm now in the Russian Far East in Vladivostok, speaking to our friends from the region. Truly, as Ekaterina has mentioned, this year was a very important one for us in terms of the Sustainable Development Agenda. particularly because this was the year when Russia presented its first voluntary national review on the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, and this was done by our minister, Maxim Reshetnikov, this summer at the high-level political forum for sustainable development at the UN. I'm going to touch upon a couple of issues that I think are important for this discussion today, and I hope that it will be a useful contribution on behalf of the Russian side. So let me start by saying what we think the pandemic means for the Sustainable Development Agenda. Now, there has been a lot of discussion on this. Starting somewhere around this summer, we've seen experts and officials even questioning whether we can maintain the high level of ambition that was set by the Sustainable Development Agenda back in 2015. They say that the situation has changed and that the pandemic has introduced some serious disruptions to the prospects of achieving the Sustainable Development Agenda. And they, some say that we should adjust the SDGs and see whether we can make them achievable while maintaining ambition. Now, the counter argument to that was that even with the fallout of the pandemic and even with the damage done to the prospects in terms of eradicating global poverty, fighting hunger, even all those things considered, achieving the SDGs is still feasible and possible. It just means that it will be more difficult, but it's still possible. And the other argument was that we have to maintain the 2030 agenda as a sort of a North Star for the global community to move towards. Now, in our opinion, we believe that the Sustainable Development Agenda is very flexible and inclusive, and we think that it still works as a, at least for now, it still works as a guiding system, as a guiding principle for where the global community wants to be by 2030. If anything, I think that the pandemic has actually highlighted the relevance of this agenda for global development. It has made very explicit the connection between economic, social, and environmental factors. This is something that has become very obvious, I think, precisely in this pandemic as a basic principle for the Sustainable Development Agenda, because the 2030 Agenda is not just the goals, it's also a set of principles and a set of ways to plan and coordinate national and international development policy. Now, as for Russia, this agenda, as I said, has been gaining interest. I'd say that over the last year and a half, we've seen a great increase in events and discussions about how we are implementing the Sustainable Development Agenda, what we are doing to move closer towards it. And I have to say that the VNR, the Voluntary National Review process itself, was very helpful in this regard, because and I think it's a good example, because as we were preparing the review, it was mainly done by the Analytical Center of the Russian government, with some help from our ministry and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. This work was very conducive to building communities around SDGs in itself. So we have created 17 thematic groups for each Sustainable Development Goals, which included representatives from the government, from businesses, from the civil society. And as we were writing these particular chapters in the review, we have managed to accumulate a lot of experience and to actually understand how Russian national planning systems and the efforts and policies that we are making lead to the achievement of Sustainable Development Goals, or where we have more to do. Now, we are now at this point when we have to think more deeply about how do we integrate the Sustainable Development Goals into national planning and the 2030 Agenda. Our logic is that the government is right now approaching development in a whole of society way that Mr. Pavinsky mentioned in his intervention. And this is why we can say that Russian national planning instruments lead to the achievement of the SDGs, even though if not all government officials are very well versed in the terminology of SDGs and can simply explain how exactly does their policies and efforts lead to the achievements of the Sustainable Development Goals. But we are now in a situation when we have a new and nascent system of national planning. We have a new set of national goals that were adopted by a presidential decree this summer. And right now there is a large bureaucratic and planning process going on with coming up with a single plan to achieve those national goals. And what we are doing here in the ministry is we're thinking about how we can calibrate these measures in this system with the SDG agenda. And I have to say that this is a very important exercise that I hope will lead us to better understanding and better, let's say, alignment of the national system with the SDGs. One specific issue that we focus heavily here at our ministry and we think is a very important item on the Sustainable Development Agenda in general is the collaboration between government and business in sustainable development, and what the private sector can do to work with the Sustainable Development Agenda and to contribute to that. We believe that there are sort of the three main levels at which businesses can interact with the SDG agenda. The first very basic one, which has been around for a very long time, actually, way before the Sustainable Development Agenda, is the concept of corporate and social responsibility, right? So companies are responsible to the stakeholders around them, to their buyers, to employees, to clients in what they do, and especially to their localities where they are situated, in what they do and how their activity contributes to the broader societal and environmental development. That is sort of a basic level which many companies are familiar with. Now, the second level is for many companies, is particularly for those that conduct international activities. The Sustainable Development Agenda can become a new source of barriers, right? There are many examples of that. I would say that the human rights dimension of that was with us for quite a long time, but the environmental and the climate change aspect of that is becoming very relevant these days. I don't know if any of you have followed that, but over the last 3 days, the Moscow Business School, the Skolkovo Business School has organized a large conference, a Russia-EU conference on climate change, and it has demonstrated how important this agenda is right now for Russian businesses, especially with the European Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism being upon us and what that means for the Russian exports. And the third level, of course, is how companies can seize new opportunities that appear with the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, that includes not only new markets that appear as the world moves towards the SDGs. The largest will probably be the ones in green mobility, renewable energy, green buildings, agriculture, education, healthcare, of course. Those are the large new markets that will appear. We have a couple of estimations out there at around $12 trillion by 2030, which is a huge opportunity for companies to seize as they look into how SDGs can give them new opportunities for business. And the second part is new sources for investment and finance. Green finance is something that is very much on sort of on the table right now. Our ministry in particular is in charge of building a system for sustainable investment, architecture for sustainable investment in Russia, to see how we can tap into the potential of the private sector to attract new funds into green and sustainable projects. And Russian companies are already attracting capital on conditions better than the market conditions, which are bound to their SDG targeted implementation or particular implementation of green projects. I have to say that, to be very frank with you, Russian companies, especially large companies that work on the global markets, are much better informed and much better versed than most, even of us here in the economic part of the government, in terms of what the SDGs mean for their business, of course. They're actually usually the first to identify barriers and opportunities because that is what businesses do better, right? They adapt and they find opportunities, and for them, it's not just an issue of reputation anymore. It's an issue of operational opportunities and operational risks, of financial opportunities and financial risk. So I think that for all of us, if we want to get a better understanding of what SDGs mean for the real economy, we really have to go to the companies and talk to them. Now, I also want to make a couple of points about the international dimension of that. We have been trying to integrate cooperation with our partners on the international arena on SDGs into how we operate with our multilateral formats and bilaterally. And it has been said a couple of times already today that without global and especially regional partnerships, this is something that will not be possible. I'll make a couple of examples from this year. We've just seen what we call here the season of 5 summits. SCO, BRICS, APEC, G20, and the East Asia Summit. And a couple of results that we have brought to the table have a direct connection to Sustainable Development Agenda. For example, we have adopted with under the auspices of the BRICS Summit, a new strategy for economic partnership between the BRICS. And one of the 3 pillars of that strategy is sustainable development, because we believe that basically if the BRICS countries do not achieve the 2030 agenda, the world will not achieve the Sustainable Development Agenda. Another example is the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, where we have adopted a concept for cooperation between the SCO members in development of rural and remote territories. And that is something that we attach particular importance to in the concept of the leaving no one behind principle. Our countries, especially here today, we started off with Russia being a very vast country spanning across numerous time zones. And it's not just about Russia. A lot of our countries and the Eurasian region in general has all of these vast, remote and rural territories where a lot of people live, and we have to provide these people with basic financial, social, public, and digital services. And this is what this concept and the strategy focuses on. Bringing the technical, the digital, the societal, and the institutional solutions that can help these people achieve the level of prosperity that they deserve. And the last example, which may seem minor, but it's very much in line with what Hasegawa-san said about the priorities of Japan in terms of women empowerment, is in APEC, we initiated and we've just actually finished, and for this year, a large contest for women entrepreneurs called APEC Best Awards, where we find women entrepreneurs from the APEC region who submit their projects, and there's a esteemed panel of experts who choose the best projects and support women entrepreneurs, which we think is a very important issue in terms of women empowerment and their integration into the economy. Now, those are just a couple of examples, but there are numerous ways of integrating the SDG agenda into our cooperation, particularly in the Northeast Asian region. Now, to finish off, I'll say a couple of things about what the next big steps we think are. The first, as I've mentioned, but I think it's a very important issue, is promoting SDGs as an instrument, as something that is important for the businesses and for the private sector, particularly moving beyond the large globalized companies and sort of going deeper into the mid-sized and small medium enterprises and the sort of the thick of the private sector in Russia and elsewhere, showing them the value of SDGs and what it can give them and how that can become a challenge for them as well. The second issue is, of course, cascading the SDGs to regions and localities. Again, this is something that was said by speakers before me. It's a very important issue that we teach regional managers, administrators, companies working in the localities and local communities to use this framework for their better good. And finally, of course, and this is something that I think is going to be very exciting, and we are looking at it basically, is building communities of experts and building communities of people who know what the SDGs are, how to use them, how to implement them into their strategies, policies. And this is something that I think where we have moved a long way from a year and a half or 2 years ago, and especially since 2015. And we'll need more of that. And it brings me great joy to see that we have young people interested in the SDG agenda all over Russia and the world, and that the SDG agenda is there for key multilateral regional organizations. Personally, for me, I've participated, I think, in at least 3 or 4 UN SCAP meetings this year that are that focus on SDGs, and I think we'll have one more next week for the I think North and Central Asian region. So there's always a lot of these events happening, and it's really important that we build this community of people who care and people who can find how the SDG and the 2030 agenda is aligned with respective national policies and how they can reinforce each other. I'll end here, and if there are any questions, I'll be happy to participate in discussion further on. Thank you.
Thank you, Anton, and thank you for bringing in the national perspective on SDG from the Russian viewpoint, and also for pointing out the very recent avenues of international cooperation, not only in Northeast Asia, but also within the G20 framework. APEC is wider than just Northeast Asia. And so let me now make a humble contribution to the women empowerment and pass the screen to Dr. Kihara Hunt, who is the associate professor at the graduate program on human security at the University of Tokyo. And she's also a board member at the Academic Council on the UN system. She makes an extensive research on human rights and the rule of law, the UN peace operations, and in particular, the UN police. And she has a number of publications related to her research interests. So, Professor Kihara Hunt, the floor is yours. And as I know, you will be speaking about SDG 16 and its application to Northeast Asia. Please, you're welcome.
Thank you very much for this invitation. This is really exciting to be part of this. So what I'm going to talk about is what was mentioned by the previous speaker, Mr. Alexei Stanosis, I'm sorry for the pronunciation, about this global framework and local implementation. But with regard to SDG 16, which is often called peace SDG, peace goal. Peace goal is the one that brings justice and development together, and it is based on this idea of the rule of law. I'm coming to this conclusion very quickly because of time, but what I would like to highlight is the two sort of targets, 16A and 16B, where they talk about strengthening national institutions and to promote non-discriminatory laws and policies. So this one is really very strictly linked to this idea of rule of law. And so my starting point was that the UN, sort of the global community, sees the rule of law as a core of peace and security, and it is linked to development and human rights. Okay, so let's start with what is the UN's global rule of law, sort of UN's and global rule of law idea. So it's a principle of governance in which all persons, institutions, I'm sorry, I have to put this one aside to see my slide. Okay, in which all persons, institutions, and entities, public and private, including the state itself, are accountable to laws that are publicly promulgated, equally enforced, and independently adjudicated, and which are consistent with international human rights norms and standards. So this is the global rule of law idea. And it has a very much focus on security, justice, human rights, and institutional focus is on police, judiciary, and corrections. That has been the UN's kind of approach. So in sum, the UN sees that the rule of law must have the law. So the law must decide, not people. And there must be a mechanism in place to guarantee that. But plus, the governing law must have global values incorporated in it. So the particular mention is made to human rights norms, and it's firmly linked to democracy. Okay, but there's some flexibility left in this idea, and there seem to be a referral to the national implementation. Sort of the flexibility is left for national states to decide how they're going to implement it, and it seems that it is acknowledged as a very important notion, but there are lots of flexibility. And my question then was, how is this global concept of the rule of law implemented? And just because I am based in Japan, I chose 3 countries in Northeast Asian Northeast Asian region, namely Japan, South Korea, and China. And I wanted to see how different they understand the rule of law and how they implement the rule of law. Why? Okay, so first point was about the World Rule of Law Index. So I wanted to see if we, Japan, South Korea, and China, are located in a sort of similar way in the Rule of Law Index. It is relative, you can see, so Japan is on 15th, South Korea is on 17th, and China is on 88th point. But this is basically measured by the world, sort of global rule of law. Okay, so then I wanted to see, is there any regional trend in the implementation of the rule of law? So 4 points I kind of pick from the general sort of discussion. So one is that the constraints on government powers are generally low. The government is relative, the openness of the government is generally low compared to the global standard. Fundamental rights is generally low, slightly low to low, and there is a general absence of civil conflict. But this is all I could see in a regional trend. And I noticed much more about the difference in the implementation of the rule of law in those 3 countries. So the diversity is summarized in 2 areas. One is procedural, and the other one is substance. So procedural is about no one being above the law, and substance is about the rule itself. What is the rule that they implement? So I looked at those 2 elements in 3 countries. So about no one above the law, I will have to go quickly, but Japan has relatively firm mechanism to make sure that no one is above the law. South Korea has a probably even firmer mechanism to make sure that no one is above the law, and it's very noticeable to see the rapid introduction of this system, the mechanism, since 1990s. China has a different stance on this. It has a particular position of the political party, and the party regulations and national law conjoined. And there are some elements that are not seen in Japan or South Korea. Then I looked at the substance. What is the rule, the law? So Japan has relatively democratic sort of idea, but the human rights or sort of individualism or individual entitlement or the oversight sort of over the authority is relatively weak. Now South Korea is has put a system, the law in place, which is very democratic, and it's rapidly integrating the principle of the rule of law in a very global sense. And then I looked at China. So it is different. So there are there's the position of the authority, which is in a way guaranteed, and the collective responsibility is placed over individual rights, and there are exceptions in application of law. So I find the implementation very different. So then I thought, okay, what is the thinking behind? Why is it so different in its implementation? So that's why I looked at the rule of law culture. I thought maybe the understanding is different. So this is a very big sort of summary of my findings. But Japan has a slightly different idea of the rule of law from the global rule of law idea. So independence of justice, it is there in a mechanism, but the judiciary tends to not use that so much. So the judiciary uses more of a majoritarian approach, and the rule of law thinking is not based on individual human rights. South Korea, I found, this was a new finding for me, has the closest idea of the rule of law to the global model. And it was quite surprising for me because in the 1960s and 70s, the Korean scholars found that it was so alien, the global rule of law idea was so alien to the culture that Korean would never be able to integrate it into the mechanism. But however, in the 1990s, they got very rapidly integrated, and the value that they incorporated is the closest among these three countries to the global rule of law idea. And when I looked at China, the idea is very different. So it is a rule of law, rather rule by law. So it is a tool, and the population is seen as a sort of united corporate. So it is the people who is one, and there is the authority who is one, and the rule is by law. So it's a different understanding of the rule of law. Okay, then I thought, okay, but maybe they use these words, the rule of law, in a very different way, internally and externally, maybe. So I looked at how those three countries use this concept outside the country. So it seems that Japan uses it in a different way when it is talking about external assistance, especially, for example, for Southeast Asia. South Korea uses a very similar idea as what they do internally, and China also uses a similar approach as they do internally. But when China uses the rule of law idea externally, it seems that they focus more on the sort of implication of the rule of law idea rather than the concept itself. Okay, so my conclusion is that it is very diverse, and it's the diversity of the rule of law is not only in the implementation of the rule of law, but also about the very idea of the rule of law. So when the rule of law is agreed by states as a principle, but then maybe they actually mean completely different things. Maybe it is the effect, maybe a little bit limited. So that was my finding, and the bell was 10 minutes, so I conclude here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Kiha Hunt, for a very interesting and insightful presentation, for a very interesting research question, which relates to the real life, to the practice of law implementation. I unfortunately cannot here go into much details, but if we take Russia into your number of cases, I think the findings will be even more interesting. And secondly, thanks a lot for sticking to the time limit. And now let me pass the screen to Dr. Kapil Narula, who will share his perspective on the sustainable development from the viewpoint of his research interests. And he's a senior researcher and at the Energy Efficiency Group at the Institute for Environmental Sciences at the University of Geneva in Switzerland. And he will be speaking about SDG 7, which is affordable and clean energy, the way ahead. Dr. Kapil, please, the floor or screen is yours. You're welcome.
Thank you so much, Katerina, and also to the functionaries of the MUN, especially Alexei and Jelena. I think you guys are doing a wonderful job. You're much smarter and motivated than us and the entire team. So the world is definitely in good hands. What I'll do is I'll start my small presentation on SDG 7, the way ahead. And maybe someone can just let me know if the screen is in the full screen mode and you can hear me correctly.
We can hear you well, but we cannot see your screen, I'm afraid.
Just give me a moment then. I'm getting a screen share failed code. What I'll do is, Katrina, if you can can move to the next speaker and I'll rejoin the event. Is it okay?
Okay. Okay, let us now turn to Chrisman Caballero from the Philippines, also our long-standing friend and colleague. He's currently a foreign policy research officer at the Australian Government Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade at the Embassy of Australia to the Philippines. But he's also extensively involved in teaching and in doing research, because he's also part of Ateneo de Manila University, and professor at the Helena Bennett School of International Relations and Diplomacy at the Philippine Women's University. So Chrisman will share his ideas on SDG 4, quality education in the Philippine context. And I know that Chrisman is involved in the grassroots activities in terms of enabling the local communities in terms of education. So Chrisman, please let me pass the floor to you while Dr. Kapil will manage the technical issue.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much, Dr. Koldunova, to Alexei, to Galina, and to all the organizer of this panel discussion. I'll try to make it on time to present my presentation, which will focus on goal 4, which is to achieve the quality education lessons from the Philippines. So Galina, please flash the presentation. Right, so the title is Inclusive and Equitable Quality Education Achievements, Challenges, and Lessons from the Philippines, and how can East Asia could actually try to learn from, in the case of how the Philippines have implemented the SDG 4. Next slide, please. So the Philippine government has been very active, at the same time has been very serious in implementing the SDGs and has incorporated it into the contextualization of localizing the SDGs, and has set up primarily the environment for how SDGs would be implemented and how it would be monitored. And actually, last year, the Philippines has submitted its national voluntary report in terms of its progress in achievement of the SDGs. So the National Economic Development Authority and its attached agency, which is the Philippine Statistic Authority, is the one that is in charge to ensure that the implementation of SDG is achieved by the Philippine government. And the cabinet level that is responsible for development and planning, and look into synergies that the SDG indicator framework in relation to monitoring the Philippine medium to long-term development plans. So later on, I will show you the framework by which how the Philippines 2017 to 2022 development plan, and how this Ambition 2040, a long-term plan of economic development, will be synergized in terms of allowing the SDGs to be incorporated into the framework. Next slide, please. So Ambition 2040 is to achieve the life that is matatag, which is strongly rooted, maginhawa, which is comfortable, and panatag, which is a secure life for Filipinos. So this is representing a collective long-term vision and aspiration of the Filipino people for themselves and for the country. So the Philippines will be a prosperous, predominantly middle-class society that is no one is poor, that people will live long and healthy lives, to have a smart and innovative and live a high-trust society. So the attainment of the SDGs should pave the way for the achievement of Ambition Natin 2040. And our vision is to be more consistent with the core principle of SDGs, that it should be inclusive. It should be at the same time, the way how it should be implemented must be collaborative. It must be taking into account a whole country approach in the implementation of the goals. So next slide, please. So this is the development plan of the Philippines, as you can see, it is 3 pillars: malasakit, pagbabago, and patuloy na pag-unlad. Malasakit is enhance the social fabric of the Philippine society. Pagbabago, inequality reducing transformation, and patuloy na pag-unlad, which is more focusing in terms of increasing growth potential for the Philippine society and economy. So this is to take into account an integrative approach that would look in both the national level and local levels in the implementation of the SDG. It is to provide a robust foundation for inclusive growth and high trust, resilient society, and globally competitive knowledge economy. Next slide, please. So from the framework, you can see that these SDGs have been incorporated. And in Pillar 2, which is pagbabago, inequality, reducing transformation, Goal 4 is being part of this. As you can see there at the second to the bottom portion of this blue portion pillar of this framework, you can see that the clear goal to implement Goal 4 is part and parcel of this framework of economic development for the Philippines. Next slide. So Goal 4 is to ensure, of course, inclusive, equitable, quality education and to promote lifelong learning and opportunities for all. It must be consistent with the aspiration of the Filipino people. It actually provide a description and enhance the kind of society that is more adaptive to the globalization and how it would be more addressing an inclusive and more sustainable approach for each of the sectors that has been affecting by these SDGs. To pursue a quality education, which is the priority of the government, which of course the 1987 Philippine Constitution guarantees the right of every Filipino people to have access to education, which is providing a highest priority in terms of budget of the Philippine government. Importance of promoting lifelong learning or education and skills development as part of a strong commitment to accelerate human capital development and in achievement of the SDG. Next slide, please. So the 2019 Global Education Monitoring Report have lauded the Philippines in its progress for providing access to education for vulnerable groups. So we have included, of course, persons with disabilities, indigenous peoples, out-of-school youths, and overseas Filipinos to be part of this framework and how they will be going to benefit from these programs that the government have provided or enhanced. At the same time, all of these are actually legislation. Let's say, for example, the Alternative Learning System, we have the Governance of Basic Education Act 2001 has been implemented, the Indigenous Peoples Education, Enhanced Basic Education Act, and now that the government has been implementing through the Department of Education, the modernization of the Philippine education, the move to a much more clear goals of a K-12 program. You know that the Philippines been actually one of the last to implement the K-12 program in the region, of course, globally. But we see that in the first step towards our few years after the implementation of the K-12 program has been aligned with the SDG implementation. And we also have to focus as well with technical education and skills development, because as we are actually being large in terms of sending our foreign workers abroad, so the Filipino workers abroad, to ensure that the skills of the workers will be much more aligned to and become more responsive to the needs of the global community. Next slide, please. So complementary programs have been provided. We have school feeding programs by the Department of Education. We have various government assistance, conditional cash transfer programs have been implemented that would strengthen the linkages of the government, the academe, and the industry to be more consistent as a key strategy to the achievement of the Philippine Development Plan of 2017 to 2022. Next slide. So this is, we see that the implementation of Goal 4, we see that the net enrollment rate in the Philippines have actually increased 94.2% in 2017, and completion rate is around 92.4% as well. And if you could notice that the dropout of school leavers rate is around 1.6%. So it's very low. So everything, when the school children entered into primary school, they'll be able to finish up to secondary and even enter into higher education institutions because the government has provided them access to basic education, eventually to higher education, providing free for those communities that are poor communities. The government has provided free access even up until to the higher education that the state and government institutions of the Philippine education is actually focusing on this implementation of the project. Next slide, please. So the achievements is that we see that there is an increased access to basic education. So from primary, there's 94.2% to secondary, 76% in terms of net enrollment. There's also implementation of various inclusive education programs addressing the needs of the vulnerable learners, the alternative learning system, alternative delivery modes, indigenous people's education, and special education to be part of the system. So it's inclusive. No? It actually adheres to the principles of the SDG. Next slide, please. So third is implementation of universal access to quality tertiary education. We have free technical vocational education training that has been benefiting around 51,325 individuals by the end of 2018. And however, we see there are gaps remain to ensure the quality of basic education with the new K-12 program that the government has been rolling out. There's a need to further enhance training for our teachers as well as to our educators to have a standardized teacher performance assessment, identify needs, and support professional development. So 75,000 new teaching positions were open across the country to ensure that there will be the student ratio and the teacher ratio would be much more able to achieve that gap. Next slide, please. So the best practices in the case of the Philippines, we have access to basic education of vulnerable groups have been expanded. We have incorporated ICT to provide access to education, especially with the technical and skills development authority that has been in charge of the vocational programs in the country. And at the same time, we have created partnerships across private sector and civil society to improve access of quality education. That is Adapt to School program. We have also Brigada Escuela, which provides a voluntary effort to prepare public school facilities for the opening of the school year. So this is actually an effort that is not only government, but we also have to include non-governmental organizations to be part and parcel of these programs. Next slide, please. So what are the challenges and next steps? Of course, we need to have resource mobilization. We need to have the government will going to implement a subcommittee on the SDG implementation. There is a need to sustain cooperation and partnership with internal development and funding organization. At the same time, how to further localize it, taking it into the transposition of a global policy towards localizing it in the context of the Philippines and making it more being achieved on the local context. That's the reason why that we involve the local governments. So the Department of Interior and Local Government and the National Economic Development Authority have signed a memorandum to ensure the localization of the development program of the Philippines is aligned with the SDGs. Next slide, please. So we also have included a stakeholder engagement as primary towards the achievement of the SDGs. And of course, important of this is monitoring it. Of course, you have to know how it have impacted, of course, the beneficiaries of the, especially in goal 4, which is of course the students, the Philippine education sector that is being part and parcel of these programs. Next slide, please. So what are lessons can be learned from and how the other countries could learn from the case of the Philippines? So integration of the SDGs into the Philippine Development Plan is key to the implementation of the SDG. And countries need to adapt them to the national context, taking into account their specific sets of constraints and opportunities. We need to create platforms for coordination to further the monitoring, especially in terms of statistics, enhance the skills of the technological especially for developing states like the Philippines. We need to focus more of our attention in terms of statistics monitoring, as well as how we provide a more granulated data that would have created a bigger impact in terms of our analysis and how we deliver our policy to the beneficiaries. We need also to have a concrete actions that have to take into deliver services and provide economic opportunities to all sectors. So the goals should translate to the intended beneficiaries, placing the individuals at the very core of the agenda. So, you know, this is SDGs is a very ambitious 17 goals, but how we see is that at the core of this should always be taking into the role of every individual to be part and parcel of these grand and scheme of providing economic development to be more inclusive, it more be sustainable to the long-term benefits of the communities. Development in the post-2015 era must have to take into account a multi-stakeholder agenda. Various actors besides the government have the role to play. And my next slide and the last slide would be focusing in the Philippines will have to focus on ensuring that the programs, activities, and projects that support the SDGs are funded and effectively localized. So it's very important that funding is taken into account and how the government will going to translate that funding to ensure that, of course, you eliminate the cumbersome, slow-paced bureaucratic system. At the same time, how you address the government is to eliminate corruption on the lower end, to ensure that, of course, you provide not only the facilities, but you also provide the kind of training to your and skills so that your teachers will also be much more adept and at the same time will be more they will able to at the same time address, of course, the changes of the global system. No, they have to respond to it. They become more adaptive to it. So the bottom line here is that in the case of the Philippines is that we incorporated a whole of government approach, a whole of society approach, not only the government, but of course the non-governmental organization in the implementation of SDG, especially in the case of SDG 4. And how we see that the government, the private sector, the non-government actors are directed towards sustainable development that leaves no one behind, and realizing that the Philippine Development Plan 2040, which is Ambition 2040, that is providing a life for every Filipinos that is matatag, which is a strong family and community ties, maginhawa, which is comfortable, and panatag, which is peaceful and secure. So the emphasis here is to take into account solidarity, subsidiarity in view of the common good of all, which means that the addressing to the fulfillment of every individuals, to every Filipinos, and of course the region in ASEAN context as a whole, to be part and parcel of these goal that the United Nations have been spearheading, which will eventually harmonize and at the same time integrate all stakeholders into the new global village. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chrisman, for such an extensive talk about the Filipino perspective on education goal. And here we unfortunately have to say that in times of COVID, education became unsustainable for many societies and for many countries. According to a recent UN report, 1.6 million people faced disruptances in the education processes and could not have an access to the ongoing education process. So that's one more huge challenge for implementation of SDG 4, and the national perspectives here, I think, are important, and more importantly is to share the experience how we all can overcome these problems. Now, as I'm aware, the technical issue is addressed, and I can pass the screen to Dr. Kapil Narula for his presentation on SDG 7. Dr. Narula, could you please?
Thank you, Katerina. So now are you able to see my screen?
We can see your screen and we hear you perfectly well.
Okay, that'll be great. Thank you so much for the invitation. And what I'm going to talk about is SDG 7. And I've contextualized it in the and to have a look at what is the global energy challenge. And you would all know that the global energy consumption has been increasing over the past decade. And this is primarily driven by increase in population as well as increase in energy use. But I identify energy equity as a greater issue behind this global energy challenge. And if you would see on this axis, we have per capita energy consumption of different countries. And on this axis, you have time starting from 1975 to 2015. And there you see lies the crux of the problem that many countries are on the top extreme end of energy per capita energy consumption, while most of the developing countries in Africa, Asia, etc., are rather at the bottom end. And this wide variation in per capita energy consumption is one major concern and a big global energy challenge, especially, and that's why SDGs 7 was clearly formulated. The other global and climate energy challenge is this, that we know of the Paris Climate Agreement and the importance of reducing GHG emission reduction. We currently are about 35 gigatons CO2 of emissions level. This is the scenario of where current policies have already been accounted for. And in 2050 or 2060, you know that if the current policies stay the way it is, we are never going to achieve the 1.5 or 2 degree scenario. This is the 2 degree scenario. This is beyond 2 degree scenario, or the 1.5 degree scenario, in which countries have committed to reach CO2 neutrality by 2050 or beyond. And there so lies the challenge of policy inaction in some countries and the need for accelerating policy action. And how will these reductions in GHG emissions come about? They will come from renewables, from CCS, from fuel switching. Efficiency plays a very, very important role in reducing GHG emissions, and some part may come from nuclear. And if you look at the other scenario, which is what's happening since the past 50 odd years or 100 years, is that fossil fuels contribute to about 75% of our global energy consumption. Things have not changed much in 2018 also. They contribute to, this is oil, this is natural gas and coal. They continue to contribute to about 75%. And in the stated policy scenario of 2040, they are likely to grow and would still continue to contribute to 75%. And therefore, there's a need for acceleration on policy issues. Moving on to progress on SDG 7, you all know what is SDG 7. And the first panel shows what's the baseline in 2010. And this is the current levels in 2018. This is the target for 2030. And the progress is shown like this. From 1,200 people, 1,200,000 million people who did not have universal electricity access, we have not improved very much. The target is universal electricity access, but we are completely off track there. On the target of universal access to clean fuels and technology, again, things have moved rather slowly, and we are still around the same numbers. And we are completely again off track. In the next 10 years, we cannot reach these targets. Looking at what has happened exactly, and the focus here now being in South Asia and especially India, a lot of efforts have been taken in the past 10 years. We have a direct subsidy scheme for LPG and clean cooking access, which has lifted many, many people from and have provided them clean cooking access. We also had clearly a very large focus in the past 10 years on household rural electrification, which has led to some brilliant results. And most of the reductions have come in from India in the Southeast, South Asia, as well as some improvements in China, Indonesia on clean cooking. We are pretty good on increasing share of renewable energy and modern renewable energy, and I'll not talk about this. But what is of concern to me, working especially on energy efficiency, is on the target of doubling the rate of energy efficiency improvement. And while we need about 3% increase every year, we are hardly half of that, and we are only at about 1.2% of increase per year. And the energy efficiency report released yesterday by the IEA talks that there is still further reduction in 2020 because of COVID. It's likely to be there. And where will these energy efficiency improvements come from? It will come from major contributors or users of power. And here, if we see what we require is about 5, which is the average, global average, but consumers like Russia, Canada, and especially high-income countries are very low on energy efficiency, and large progress needs to be made there. So I'd like to focus on some sustainability principles and apply them to energy. And the Natural Step is an organization which has clearly outlined such principles. And they say that in a sustainable society, nature is not subject to systematically increasing concentrations of substances from the Earth's crust. That means all extractive activities such as fossil fuel, minerals, metals should decrease and finally become zero. And there should be no systematically increasing concentration of substances produced by the society. And therefore, energy systems should be zero, recyclable, or we should produce biodegradable waste during the entire life cycle, which will include production, use, and end of life. Very importantly, if we see natural ecosystems are cyclic and have no wastes, it's only the industrial economy which is linear and has waste, and we can learn from nature and can adopt nature-based solutions. The third principle is that there should be no systematically increasing degradation by physical means. That means no ecosystem degradation, and we should invest in regenerative activities for regenerating air, soil, water, biodiversity. And the last aspect is about social issues, and there should be no structural obstacles to people's health, influence, and competence. And therefore, from the energy domain, we should look at creating meaningful jobs, and we should look at just and equitable energy transition. So what's the way ahead for SDG 7 and for tackling global energy challenges as such? We look at some trends in energy transition, and decarbonization is a big trend with renewable energy coming in. We also look at digitalization, where smart energy systems are coming in. We have decentralization of energy sources, and therefore we are becoming prosumers. That means consumers as well as producers. The new trends which we see are trends in energy storage, both in terms of batteries and thermal energy storage, hydrogen as an energy carrier. And surprisingly, along with decentralization, we also see a trend towards network integration, in which you have multi-energy systems and various kinds of grids, heat grid, electricity grid, and thermal grids are being integrated. And to these 3 Ds, I would like to add my C, which is circularity, and E, energy efficiency. And that's very, very essential for if we have to look at future energy transitions. What I would like you to ask is to look beyond GDP to measure well-being, and what are the metrics we can use, such as for measuring, such as gross national happiness, and move away from the focus of only using GDP or personal wealth as a metric of wellness. And I would also like you young budding sustainability enthusiasts to think about that, should we move from the current system of taxation to taxing resource consumption, and what difference would this make for a zero waste society? I always focus and emphasize on what can I contribute, and it's important that you take personal actions. And there are some links where I would encourage young students to go to know what is your ecological footprints and what are the ways in which you can adopt a sustainable lifestyle. I also would like to say that you should make and share your personal commitments, and I'm sharing mine personal commitment publicly, that I'm going to offset my CO2 emissions from air travel starting this year. So in conclusion, I would like to say that SDG 7 is a subset of a large global energy challenge, and its progress is inadequate. I would encourage you to think what after SDGs, because by the time you come into the UN system, you have to think beyond 2030, because certainly we are not going to meet that goal. Then I would like you to choose energy sustainability over other measures, and energy efficiency is one way which can definitely get you there. The best form of energy is energy which is not used. Lastly, I would say that systems thinking and coordinated global action is extremely important to achieving SDGs and to tackle the global energy and climate challenge. And lastly, youth. You are the change makers. So youth, you, the change makers. And I would like you to take action, action, action now. Thank you so much for your time and attention.
Thank you, Dr. Narula. And well, while listening to you, I thought that the year 2030 is not that far away as it used to, to seem some time ago. And if these 3Ds will be implemented, at least partially, we will see a complete reshape in the models of development of so many countries, Russia included, Canada included, the Middle Eastern countries included, and we should get prepared right now. Well, without much further ado, because our time is running fast, let me pass the floor to Ms. Nabuko Kajura, Sustainable Development Officer in East and Northeast Asia Office of Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific. And I think that the topic which Ms. Nabuko Kajura opted for to speak about will be a very logical conclusion for our panel discussion today. Ms. Kajura, could you please start your presentation? You are very warm welcomed.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to share my screen, but I do not see this option of sharing the screen for now. Do you have any idea?
It should appear in the bottom, the green button.
Oh, yeah, got it.
Okay.
Okay.
We can see your presentation. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay. Thank you very much for this opportunity. And I know that I understand this time is short, so I would like to start right away. Actually, I would like to look at the Northeast Asia SDG progress in SDG implementation, referring to the SCAP assessment. But there's Mr. Vladimir Pravinsky already nicely gave outline and the information and what the SCAP does, and including the progress of SDG implementation. So I would just, it is basically the visualization of what he has mentioned. This is assessment for 2020. Of course, this data is based on 2019. And the difference probably is that from what you can get from the website is that this assessment is including Russia, which is normally included in the Northeast Asia group for the statistical consistency. But anyway, that's the major little disclaimer on this the progress assessment. This is actually try to look at the snapshot of progress of each goal for the subregion, Northeast Asia. By Northeast Asia, I'm talking about China, Japan, South Korea, North Korea, Russia, and Mongolia. So you may actually be familiar with this, but then the blue bars actually progress and reds are regress. And those, the little, the signs which looks like a mobile phone signal, these are actually the data availability. So you can see there are like the issues of data availability in this assessment. Anyway, and for example, the second bar, the second bar in the zero hunger, the subregion is just on track, which means that the subregion is just on track to achieve the goal by 2030 if the current pace of the progress continues. but it has not yet reached the target. And there are actually certain challenges in making this kind of assessment, but it also indicates sub-regional specific challenges. As Mr. Pavinsky and I already elaborated, there are progress in the goals related to socioeconomic development, such as poverty, hunger, clean water, and so on. But on the other hand, the slow progress on the equality, for example, the gender on the goal 5, or reduce inequality in goal 10, as well as environment-related indicators. So the COVID-19 pandemic, obviously this is not reflected in this assessment, but it may have wiped out some of these achievements, even if it was already making a progress for the good progress for sub-region, and maybe worsen some of the goals which was with slow progress or regressing at this point. That I will talk about it in a minute. And as I mentioned, there are like some, we are aware of the certain challenges in making this kind of progress assessment. You may or may not agree. But then when you actually compare the progress of the different sub-regions in Asia Pacific, it's North Central Asia, Southeast Asia, South and Southwest Asia and Pacific, they show some different challenges that they are facing. For example, in South and Southwest Asia, clean water and sanitation, that is goal 6, is still a major challenge, which is not the case for Northeast Asia. And the Pacific, for example, is another example, is still struggling with the slow progress in providing quality education, that's goal 4, and so on. So we have this, we conducted a study on the impact of COVID on Northeast Asia. So I just would like to highlight quickly on these issues, but then I already noticed that many issues already been highlighted about the challenges. So I will just, I will not go into details. And this graph shows the infection of the COVID-19 up to the end of October. Of course, now we are talking about the third wave. So it is even like the fast outdated, all these kind of graphs are. But what I need to be highlighted here is that these health issues are affecting people different group of people differently. And for example, I'm not going to details, but then for example, for women, elderly people, or migrant workers, or children, for example, the elderly persons, of course, the vulnerability is an issue because basically they have more sort of health, they are more vulnerable to this pandemic, but the fatality rate is higher. And also there's people with a disability. Those people also have these issues of the accessibility, because when they actually the COVID pandemic is in place, the health services actually are giving a priority to the pandemic. So many of these people actually are given a lower priority for dealing with their health issues. And the migrant and the refugees, for example, they actually their access to health and other services are often limited because of the status or the health protections or coverage or language and other barriers. And needless to say, economy is contracted in the Northeast Asia, as well as the other parts of the world. So that actually affects SDGs progress in different ways. And this analysis, I'm not going into the details about this analysis, but this economic downturn actually has a different impact on different sectors. For example, the sectoral level, the impacts are particularly significant in transport, trade, manufacturing, and service industry. So for example, the service industry, where there's a lot of women, actually women employment is found in this sector. So this impact on this employment for women is even bigger than men. So, and then other aspect is digital technologies. This actually represent both opportunity and challenges. And I remember there are some other speakers already talked about the digital technologies, so I will not go into details for now. And of course, the job losses and livelihood, which is one other major aspect of the COVID-19, because the impact of COVID-19 on economic activities led to the decline in labor demand and resulting in the large job losses in Northeast Asia. And it is impacting the different groups differently, and like young people, women, and elderly persons, or persons with disability, workers in the micro and small and medium enterprises, and migrant workers. I would just highlight, for example, the young people's impact, which young people are hit hard because the companies tend to fire the inexperienced young workers first. And job losses combined with disruption of education and training facilities actually caused by COVID-19, which also actually have the longer impact on the young people. So I would like to just highlight this impact on young people, because I'm sure that there are a lot of audience here, young people here. And just I would like to spend a few minutes on the ESCAP work on SDG in Northeast Asia. As mentioned by Mr. Pabinsky, of course, the SDG is overarching framework of the UN, the work undertaken by the UN. So just to show what could be a possible engagement, for example, of young people, like this UN, the model UN group. I would like to highlight one of these activities that we organize, which is Northeast Asia Multi-Stakeholders Forum on Sustainable Development Goals, which actually is preparation for the Asia-Pacific level discussion on SDG, the Asia-Pacific Forum on Sustainable Development, Sustainable Development, which is actually the regional preparation for the global level discussion on SDG, namely the high-level political forum on sustainable development. And our focus is on stakeholder participation, which is a key pillar for implementation of SDG. So the contribution of this kind of forum is to provide the opportunity to bring together the stakeholders from government, academia, international communities, or the civil society, private sector, and so on. I remember this, Mr. Anton actually have given us a presentation in our Northeast Asia Multi-Stakeholders Forum on this Russians implementation of the SDG. So this actually is an opportunity to provide this kind of the dialogue among the different stakeholders. So, and then what I just would like to highlight some of this discussion that came out, which is specific to the sub-region, is obviously they are like any other sub-regions. There's significant impact on COVID and the increased vulnerable population. And they actually have more discussion on who is really affected most, the disability, for example, people with the disabled group or women who are facing domestic violence and so on. And they also, for the sub-region, interesting part is the heightened role of technologies, both as a source as well as a solution for the resilient society. And when it comes to discussion, the issue with the digitization is, of course, how the governance of technology is taking place. And then, of course, the other aspects is environment sustainability, which actually been compromised. For example, the pandemic has looked like they have improved the air quality, but at the same time, it is increasing the plastic waste. So these are kind of discussion that came out through the discussion. So the idea of this kind of this forum is basically to enhance the dialogue among the countries, among the different stakeholders, in order to enhance the exchange of experiences, as well as the enhancing the sub-regional cooperation. So as there are many issues that actually been highlighted on the environment, I just wanted to actually to show one of our office is working as the Secretariat for Northeast Asia sub-regional program on environment cooperation, which actually probably it's equivalent, more or less equivalent to the other sub-regional environment mechanism, which is available, which is organized in different parts of Asia and Pacific. And lastly, I would like to highlight what are the other activities that the SCAP is doing for SDG. As I mentioned, there are a lot of most of the activity, all the activities, in fact, the SCAP and the UN is organized around the SDG and how to contribute and support the implementation of SDGs. But for the SCAP level, the regional level, the Asian SDG implementation for Asia and the Pacific. For example, we have this SDG Gateway, which is basically the data portal for SDG data on Northeast Asia, for the Asia and Pacific. For example, this SDG implementation assessment, which I just showed you at the beginning, is also available from this website. And also SDG Help Desk, which is like one-stop online platform for supporting the countries in knowledge and providing the tools, knowledge, and products, as well as the data portals to support the countries and the region to implement the SDGs. I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Nabuko Kajura, for concluding logically our discussion today. And I think that we have covered lots of important and very acute issues arising from the current moment. Technological and social shifts, health challenges, environmental challenges, energy, rule of law, business and economy role in the process of ensuring the sustainable development. And finally, national, regional, and global resilience in face of new challenges and the ways how to achieve this resilience in these uneasy times. Just several final observations. Organizational committee is collecting the questions for which unfortunately we don't have time right now, and I have to apologize for all the audience, all the interested audience who are sending us the questions, but the organizing committee will sort these questions out and will let you know about the questions raised. Secondly, let me ask everyone to turn on the cameras for the final group photo. And finally, let me pass the floor to Mr. Alexei Stenonis for his final words of gratitude from the youth audience of today's event. Thank you.
Dear guests, respected experts, let me give my final thanks on behalf of the Model United Nations of the Russian Far East. I guess, and I do believe that was a great step forward for the implementation of SDGs, because as we all remember, the decade of action of sustainable agenda is just around the corner. And let me be honest on that point, as the SDG 9 youth envoy in the Russian Federation, I do participate in many SDG related events. And again, to be especially specific and honest on that point, let's say the biggest issue, the biggest problem of many of these events is that they're mostly concentrated on the fact that SDGs are existing for several years and we all need to achieve them. The big difference of this very event and the thing I really loved it for is that it was very specific. Let me thank sincerely every speaker for a great practice oriented points arising. I have received, like maybe some of you noted this, I was rapidly answering in many messengers. I received many regards from our viewers. Let me just name several states that were connected to this YouTube broadcasting. Definitely it was China, the Republic of Korea, Japan, Russia, definitely, but also the other states not like specifically connected to the region we discussed. India, Egypt, Zambia, Ghana, Serbia, Colombia, El Salvador, and that's the people only commented me personally upon the subscription to the video. So thank you very much for that great opportunity, your great credit of trust to our organization for your participation in this event. The great respect and great regards go on behalf of MUNRFI, as like to the individual experts participated, and as well as the partnering organizations, definitely the United Nations Information Center in Moscow, as well as United Nations Economic and Social Commission for the Asia and the Pacific, and the great regards to the ASEAN Center in Gimo University, our great friend and partner, and personally our great moderator, Dr. Koldunova, for your kind attention to the participants and every speaker. So I do believe we had a great audience and a fruitful discussion, and that discussion had a great contribution in the development of future leaders of the next day, for those who is going to be in charge of the changes we all looking forward. So thank you very much.
So now for a second, please look at your web cameras and I will make a screenshot. Okay? So 1, 2, 3. Thank you very much. We will send you the screenshot with letters with questions. So thank you very much once again. And if there are no more comments or questions, I'm going to finish this Zoom meeting. Thank you once again and hope to see you somewhere in future.